There's a powerful truth in life. The less you speak, the more you see. The less you interrupt, the more you understand. In a world that rewards noise, those who master silence gain the sharpest edge. Most people are in a hurry to be heard, but wisdom is not in how much you say. It's in how deeply you observe. A thoughtful listener often understands what the loudest voice misses. Because understanding begins not with talking, but with tuning in. We've all met someone who dominates the conversation, only to miss the point entirely. Why? Because speaking was their goal, not understanding. And that's where the mistake lies. If your goal is connection, insight, wisdom, then speaking less is not a weakness. It's a strategy. The most successful leaders, thinkers, and influencers aren't the ones with the most to say. They're the ones who know when not to say it. They pause, they ask questions. They lean in when others speak. And when they do speak, every word carries weight. Silence is a superpower. It allows you to observe, to reflect, to assess. It buys you time. It gives you space to think before you act, to respond instead of react. And in those quiet moments, you gain clarity that constant chatter could never deliver. If you want to grow, in business, in relationships, in life, don't rush to add your voice. Be curious before you're clever. Seek to understand before you seek to impress. Listen with the intent to learn, not just to reply, because those who listen more lead better. Every time you choose silence over impulsive speech, you gain a little more control. Every time you resist the urge to speak just to fill the air, you deepen your influence. Understanding is the reward for the disciplined thinker, and discipline starts with restraint. So don't just aim to speak well. Aim to listen greatly. Your life will become richer not because of how much you say, but because of how well you understand. The quiet mind absorbs the most, and the patient voice changes the room. Speak less, understand more, and you'll begin to rise while others are still making noise. There's a reason you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, because you're meant to listen twice as much as you speak. But in a world that rewards talking, debating, and being the loudest voice in the room, listening has become underrated, even ignored. Yet it remains one of the most powerful tools for growth. Listening, real listening, is not just sitting quietly while someone talks. It's a discipline. It's a decision to slow down your responses, silence your ego, and tune in fully to what another person is saying. Not just the words, but the meaning behind them, the emotion in the tone, the intent behind the message. Why is listening such a game changer? Because you can't learn what you already think you know. When you're the one doing the talking, you're only repeating what you've already figured out. But when you're listening, you're opening yourself to someone else's insight, their experience, their perspective. That's where the gold is. Every time you choose to listen instead of jumping in, you give yourself a chance to grow. You create space for wisdom to enter. And wisdom isn't just knowledge. It's the ability to apply the right knowledge at the right time in the right way. That kind of discernment doesn't come from always speaking. It comes from watching, reflecting, observing, and yes, listening. The people who grow the fastest in any field, whether it's business, leadership, relationships, or personal development, are not the ones who dominate the conversation. They're the ones who take notes. They ask good questions. They seek understanding before offering advice. And when they do speak, you can tell their words are backed by deep insight. Now, here's the truth. Listening is hard. It's easier to talk. Talking makes us feel important. It gives us the illusion of control. But listening requires humility. It requires patience. You have to set aside your need to be right. You have to resist the urge to interrupt, to fix, to impress. And that's not easy, but it's worth it. The wise person learns from everyone. The loud, the quiet, the successful, the struggling. Why? Because every person you meet knows something you don't. Every story carries a lesson. Every voice has a thread of truth if you're willing to hear it. And sometimes, the thing you need to hear most comes from the place you'd least expect. Let's take this one step further. Listening isn't just about what others say, it's also about what life is trying to tell you. When you slow down enough to listen, really listen, you begin to pick up on patterns. You notice what's working and what's not. You spot opportunities that others miss because they're too busy talking, too distracted to see. Some people wonder why they're stuck, why they keep repeating the same mistakes. Often, it's because they're not listening. They're not paying attention to the feedback life is giving them. Maybe it's a conversation they keep avoiding, a lesson they keep ignoring, a truth they don't want to face. But if they'd slow down and listen, the path forward would become clear. The road to wisdom doesn't come through speaking more. It comes through hearing better. Listening helps you understand others. It helps you understand yourself. It helps you adjust, pivot, and grow. And don't think for a second that listening makes you passive. On the contrary, it makes you powerful. Because when you understand more, you can lead better. When you tune in, you can respond instead of react. You can act with intention instead of assumption. Here's a little tip the next time you're in a conversation. Instead of thinking about what you're going to say next, try focusing 100% on the person speaking. Look them in the eye. Listen not just for their words, but for their meaning. And when they finish, pause. Reflect, then respond with thought, not impulse. Do that consistently, and you'll be amazed at what happens. Your relationships will deepen. Your thinking will sharpen. Your influence will grow. And most importantly, your wisdom will multiply. Not because you spoke more, but because you listened better. So if you want to go far in life, master the skill most people neglect. Talk less. Listen more. Because the fastest path to wisdom is not through the mouth. It's through the ears. There's a quiet kind of strength that doesn't draw attention to itself. It's called restraint. Not weakness, not fear, but controlled discipline. Especially when it comes to speech. We live in a world where everyone wants to be heard. Opinions fly faster than facts. Reactions come quicker than reflection. People speak first and think later, if at all. But those who learn the value of holding their tongue gain something far more powerful than a few extra words in a conversation. They gain clarity. They gain control. And most of all, they gain deeper thought. Restraint in speech is a rare virtue, but it's a necessary one. Because every time you hold back from speaking too soon, you're not just avoiding a mistake, you're making room for wisdom. You're allowing your thoughts to settle, your emotions to cool, and your judgment to sharpen. That space, that pause, is where deeper thought begins. Some people feel the need to fill every silence with words. But the truly wise know this silence is not a void to be feared. It's a place where insight grows. It's a space where ideas are refined. And it's often in those moments of quiet restraint that the right thoughts finally rise to the surface. Speaking impulsively may satisfy the ego, but it rarely builds anything meaningful. It can damage relationships because confusion or closed doors that took years to open. But speech that's been filtered through thought, that's speech that carries weight. That's speech that moves people. That's speech that matters. You don't need to comment on everything. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to be the loudest person in the room to be the most respected. In fact, the more restraint you show in your words, the more people begin to take notice when you finally do speak. Your words gain value because you don't spend them carelessly. Let me put it this way, your mouth is a faucet, but your mind is the reservoir. If you let everything flow out at once, without thought, soon the well runs dry. But if you give yourself time, to think, to consider, to evaluate, what comes out later is richer, deeper, and far more impactful. In any conversation, there's a split-second decision you can make. Do I react or do I reflect? The person who reacts speaks quickly, often emotionally. The person who reflects chooses restraint. They pause. They consider not just what they're about to say, but why they're saying it and what impact it will have. That one pause can change the entire outcome of a conversation. Restraint also creates an environment of learning. When you speak less, you listen more. When you listen more, you absorb. You understand. And understanding, my friend, is the root of wisdom. If you're always talking, you're only reinforcing what you already know. But when you stop and listen, truly listen, you open the door to something new, something better. You see, deeper thought doesn't come in a rush. It doesn't compete with noise. It prefers the calm, the quiet, the deliberate. When you slow your words, your thoughts have time to grow. Your decisions become sharper. Your relationships become stronger. And your reputation becomes one of maturity and sound judgment. There's a lesson here: never confuse volume with value. The loudest voice in the room is not always the one with the best idea. Often, it's the one who waited, the one who thought, the one who used restraint. Think about the most respected people you know. They're not known for their endless talking, they're known for their timing. Their words matter because they speak with intention, not impulse. And they learn somewhere along the way that restraint isn't about saying less, it's about making what you do say count for more. So here's a challenge before you speak. Pause. Ask yourself, is this necessary? Is this helpful? Is this true? Give your thoughts room to breathe. You'll be surprised how often silence is the better answer. And when it's time to speak, your words will be like arrows, precise, meaningful, and unforgettable. Restraint in speech is not just good advice. It's a life strategy. It keeps you from regret. It earns you respect. And it gives your mind the freedom to think deeper, clearer, and smarter. Let others rush to speak. You take your time, because in that space, your best thoughts are born. Understanding, real, meaningful, life-changing understanding, doesn't come from how fast you speak, how sharp you argue, or how quick you interrupt. No, it grows from something much simpler and much rarer: attention. Attention is one of the greatest gifts you can give someone, and one of the greatest habits you can build for yourself. In a world full of noise, distraction, and constant rush, the ability to give focused, undivided attention is becoming almost supernatural. Think about it. When was the last time someone truly listened to you without checking their phone, without waiting to jump in, without already forming their reply in their head? It's rare. That's why it's so powerful. Because when someone gives you their attention, it tells you something important, that you matter, that your words are worth hearing, that your presence deserves respect. Now turn that around. If you want to be someone who understands, really understands, people, situations, challenges, or even your own life, you've got to learn to listen with that same kind of attention. Not distracted listening, not competitive listening, not listening to reload, but listening to learn. Understanding doesn't come by cutting people off. You don't gain insight by speaking over someone or proving them wrong mid-sentence. That's not listening. That's ego on display, and ego never makes room for wisdom. Interrupting may feel efficient, but it robs you of something valuable: the full picture. You can't see the whole puzzle if you're too impatient to let the pieces fall into place. Every time you interrupt, you're saying, "What I think is more important than what you're saying." And that mindset over time builds walls instead of bridges. The truth is, people open up when they feel heard. And when they open up, you get the information that matters. You begin to understand not just what they're saying, but why they're saying it. You pick up on fears, motives, frustrations, desires. You start to see the story beneath the words. That's where understanding lies. And it's only accessible when you give your full attention. Even beyond conversation, the same principle applies. Whether you're reading, learning, studying, observing, it's attention that unlocks depth. Attention sharpens the mind. It tells your brain, this is important. And once you give something that level of focus, your understanding multiplies. Let's not forget, you can't grow a garden by constantly digging up the soil. Growth takes stillness, patience, time. And in the same way, understanding doesn't thrive in chaos or interruption. It thrives in stillness and focus. Attention is the soil, reflection is the water, and wisdom is the fruit. Now, don't confuse silence with attention. You can be silent and still not present. Attention means engagement. It means eye contact, body language, mental alertness. It means being fully where you are. Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. You don't drift into understanding by accident. You arrive there on purpose. And here's the payoff: when you truly understand, you make better decisions. You lead with wisdom. You respond instead of react. You strengthen relationships. You avoid unnecessary conflict. You speak with relevance. You gain trust. Why? Because people know that you get it, and they trust people who take time to understand. So how do you cultivate this habit? Start by being curious. Ask questions without rushing to conclusions. Don't listen to argue. Listen to absorb. Put the phone down when someone's talking to you. Resist the itch to interrupt. Let people finish their thought. And if you don't understand, ask again. Be the student, not the judge. And most of all, slow down. You don't have to win every conversation. You don't have to speak first or speak most. Sometimes the most powerful move is to be fully present and say nothing at all. In that quiet space, people reveal more than they planned, and you'll see more than you expected. Remember, wisdom doesn't shout, it listens. And understanding isn't built in a rush. It grows in the patient, attentive moments we often overlook. So give your attention like it's gold, because it is. And when you do, you'll find that understanding begins to rise, slowly but surely, from the rich soil of your focus. There's a simple secret to gaining more wisdom, building stronger relationships, and becoming a person of influence. Ask better questions. Most people go through life thinking the key to success is having all the answers. But real progress, in business, in leadership, in relationships, even in personal development, begins not with answers, but with questions. Because questions reveal, they uncover, they open doors. A well-placed question can do more in one moment than 100 statements ever could. You see, statements close a conversation. Questions open it. Statements declare what you already know. Questions seek what you don't. And the person who keeps asking keeps growing. Let me put it like this: life responds better to curiosity than to certainty. If you walk into every room convinced you already know everything, you'll miss what's actually going on. But if you enter with a question, a sincere, thoughtful, open-ended question, you start seeing things others miss. People start talking, ideas start flowing, and clarity begins to form. Some of the most powerful moments you'll ever have in conversation won't come from what you say. They'll come from what you ask. A well-timed question can help a person open up, reflect, or even heal. Questions like, what's really bothering you? What do you want most right now? What are you afraid of? What would happen if you tried? These are questions that make people pause and think. And in that pause, something powerful is happening. Truth is rising. When you ask questions, you create space. Space for listening, space for empathy, space for understanding, and that's where real connection happens. That's where trust is built. The best leaders know this. They don't just bark orders or make grand statements. They ask questions. They want input. They seek feedback. They ask their team, what do you see that I'm not seeing? Or what's one thing we could do better? Because they understand that asking doesn't show weakness. It shows strength. It shows security. It shows a hunger to grow. Let me tell you something else. Questions reveal you. They show what you care about, what you value, and how you think. Shallow questions lead to shallow insight, but meaningful questions lead to meaningful growth. If your questions revolve around gossip, shortcuts, or complaints, you'll find yourself stuck in small thinking. But if you're asking how to improve, how to help, how to grow, how to serve, your life begins to expand. The quality of your life is often determined by the quality of your questions. Even in your private moments, ask. Ask yourself, what did I learn today? What could I have done better? Why did that situation trigger me? What is life trying to teach me here? You'd be amazed at the insights that show up when you simply slow down and ask. Now, some people avoid questions because they're afraid of the answers, but that's a mistake. Avoiding hard questions doesn't protect you. It prevents you from growing. Growth starts where comfort ends. And the right question, even the uncomfortable one, might be the very thing that sets you free. Want to transform your relationships? Start asking better questions. Want to grow your business? Start asking better questions. Want to discover your purpose? You guessed it. Start asking better questions. You'll also find this truth: people love being asked. It shows you care. It shows you're paying attention. It says you matter. And in return, people give you their trust, their honesty, their heart. Not because you made the smartest statement, but because you asked the right question. So the next time you feel the urge to impress someone with what you know, take a breath and ask instead. You might be surprised what you uncover. You might discover a problem you didn't see, a need you didn't notice, a truth you weren't prepared for. But all of it will be valuable because it came through the gateway of curiosity. In the end, it's not the loudest voice that wins. It's the most curious mind. The one who keeps asking keeps learning, and the one who keeps learning keeps growing. Remember this: statements may sound smart, but questions make you wise. So stay curious. Ask boldly. Listen carefully. Because questions don't just change conversations, they change lives. There's a timeless principle that few ever learn, but many wish they had. The less you say, the more power your words begin to carry. It's not about staying silent out of fear or insecurity. It's about speaking with purpose, precision, clarity. When your words are chosen with care, they begin to land with weight. People lean in. They listen, not because you said more, but because you said just enough. Most people fall into the trap of talking too much. They think volume equals value. They believe that filling the room with sound means they're being heard. But the truth is, it's not the person who talks the most that gets remembered. It's the one who says something that matters. When you speak too often or too quickly, your words start to lose their edge. It becomes background noise. Predictable. Repetitive. But when you exercise restraint, when you learn to pause and speak with intention, your words become rare, and anything that's rare becomes more valuable. Think about it like this. If gold were everywhere, scattered across the ground like leaves, it wouldn't be worth much. Its value is in its rarity. The same is true of meaningful words. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about being mysterious or manipulative. It's about discipline. It's about learning to listen more, think deeper, and only speak when you've got something real to say. And when you do, people won't just hear your words. They'll feel them. That kind of influence isn't built in a rush. It comes from developing a habit of thoughtful communication. You weigh your words before they leave your mouth. You ask yourself, is this necessary? Is it helpful? Is it true? And if the answer is no, you don't say it. Simple as that. There's strength in silence, power in pause. In fact, some of the most powerful people speak the least, not because they're quiet by nature, but because they've learned that words, once spoken, can't be taken back. So they use them carefully, like arrows aimed at a target, not flung around carelessly, hoping to hit something. And here's what happens when you start speaking less, your presence starts to speak for you. Your actions begin to carry your message. Your consistency becomes your statement. And when you finally do open your mouth, people stop and pay attention because they know you don't waste words. It's also important to understand that silence doesn't mean absence. Some people think that if they're not talking, they're not contributing. But the opposite is often true. When you stay silent, you create space for others to speak, for ideas to emerge, for tension to dissolve. You shift the focus from ego to clarity. And that shift is what creates real breakthroughs in conversation, in negotiation, in leadership. Now, here's the flip side. When you do speak, speak with purpose. Don't just cut your words in half. Elevate their quality. Make them count. If you're going to say something worth hearing. Share a truth. Offer encouragement. Deliver insight. Ask a meaningful question. That's when fewer words create a bigger impact. There's an old saying, a fool is known by his many words, but a wise man by his few. Why? Because a wise person doesn't need to prove themselves with chatter. Their value isn't in how much they talk, but in how clearly they think. Their wisdom doesn't come from dominating the conversation. It comes from waiting for the right moment to speak. And you can always tell the difference. The person who talks too much is usually trying to fill a void, sometimes their own insecurity, sometimes silence itself. But the person who speaks with intention commands the room. They don't need to be loud. They just need to be clear. So here's the challenge. Before you speak, pause. Not for fear, but for clarity. Ask yourself, is this the moment? Is this the message? If it is, speak it boldly. If it's not, save it. Because once you learn to discipline your tongue, you begin to elevate your influence. Remember, your words are like currency. Spend them wisely. Save them for when they matter most. And when you do speak, let it be with conviction, with care, and with value. Because the less you say, the more power your words will carry. And that, over time, is what builds your voice into something people truly listen to.